I knew something was off the moment she refused to meet my eyes. That woman, Jillian fucking Marks, had spent 3 years parroting collaboration and empowerment like she invented the damn words. Now she was sitting behind my old conference table, hands folded like a goddamn funeral director, and said it with the grace of a grocery clerk scanning frozen peas. Leave your badge. Security will walk you out. No warning, no context. Just 6 syllables that detonated everything I'd built since I was 29. I didn't say a word. I reached into my blazer, pulled the badge from its clip, and set it on the glossy walnut table in front of Andrew, the company's in-house lawyer and, once upon a time, my friend. He blinked like he'd just been slapped. Then he flipped the badge over, and everything stopped. His eyes hit the embedded chip, then the serial number, then mine. "Ma'am," he said slowly, turning to Jillian, "this ID is linked to our regulatory key person clause." Her lips parted, but before she could pretend to understand what that meant, the 2 rent-a-cops in cheap jackets shifted their weight behind me, ready to escort, like I was a stolen stapler. Pause. If you've made it this far and you're listening, please tap the subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps more than you know and lets us keep bringing you stories like this one. All right. Back to the boardroom from hell. I stood up, walked out with whatever was left of my spine intact. They had no idea what they'd just unplugged. No idea that that badge wasn't just for opening doors. It was the door. My credentials weren't ornamental. I was the named individual in Section 9.2b of the Federal Infrastructure Continuity Act. Without an active validation from me, the entire backbone of their compliance systems had 2 hours before it began its death spiral. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt walking out of that building was something colder. Like finding out your sister sold your childhood dog for concert tickets. It wasn't betrayal. It was vacancy. Like something sacred had been gutted while you were still standing inside it. The glass doors hissed close behind me at 08:14 a.m. That's when the countdown started. See, this was never about revenge. I didn't design the system to punish anyone. I designed it because 5 years ago, we almost lost everything during a sync failure with the Department of Energy. I patched it, quietly. No headlines, no lawsuits. But I made damn sure that from that day on, continuity required more than a password reset. It required me. The badge they took? It held a secure, signed root certificate, one that every continuity function, every regulatory ping, every real-time API heartbeat relied on. Pull the badge and you don't just lose access. You lose the pulse. The machine flatlines, but they didn't know that. Or maybe they did and thought I was bluffing. The problem is, I don't bluff. I write protocols. Back in my car, I sat for a moment. Just breathing, just watching the inbox on my personal phone ping with access logs, system flags, and internal validation checks. The silence from their side told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't rekeyed. They hadn't reassigned. They hadn't read the goddamn filing. And somewhere in their bright new war room, Jillian was probably smiling at her reflection in a black monitor, not realizing the lights were going out. I drove away at 8:19, and at 8:21 the first soft alarm hit. Token check failed. I knew because I built the fail-safes myself, back when they still invited me to meetings, before she decided I was legacy code. Jillian thought she was deleting a line in a spreadsheet, that my title, Director of Regulatory Systems and Continuity, was just a nameplate on a door she couldn't wait to replace with glass. Like the role was interchangeable, like she could drop some ex-McKinsey golden boy into the seat and the machine would just keep humming. But I wasn't a seat warmer. I was the seat. That title wasn't the job. It was shorthand for everything I'd woven into the company's nervous system over 12 years. They saw dashboards. I saw dependencies. They saw admin rights. I saw escalation protocols, regulatory cross-checks, heartbeat validations, and nested fail-safes. The badge didn't unlock doors. It unlocked the machine legally. Without that credential, everything operated under a suspended license after a 2-hour grace window. That wasn't paranoia. That was federal law, and I'd been the one to file it. Section 9.2b, Key Person Dependency Clause, filed after the incident in 17 when we almost lost 2 substations because someone thought it was redundant to have real-time credential pingbacks. I patched the problem that night while everyone else was at the Christmas party. And the next day, I wrote a clause into the system's continuity protocols that required validation by a specific ID, mine. I gave the board a one-pager that said, "This prevents future catastrophic outages due to credential drift." They nodded, approved it, never read the rest. No one ever reads the rest. In the final weeks, I'd been watching the signs. The little tells, HR asking for process overviews, the CFO probing about streamlining system roles, Jillian scheduling walkthroughs with people who didn't even know what a root certificate was. So I did what I always do. I prepared. Quietly. Thoroughly. I documented every token, every back-channel validation handshake, every section of compliance code tied to my name. I air-gapped backups of everything, time-stamped and notarized. I labeled the folder in the vault, "Continuity triggers do not touch." Not because I planned to use it as a weapon, but because I knew the only thing more dangerous than failure is accidental failure. The badge they demanded from me? It wasn't just plastic. It was the final handshake in a chain that held the whole thing up. It signaled presence, assurance, operational continuity under federal oversight. Its removal was supposed to initiate a handoff protocol, a 60-day overlap window where both credentials remained active while validation shifted. Jillian skipped that part. They thought the system would just ask someone else. Instead, it asked a question. Where is ID 00417? The answer it got. Credential not found. At that point, everything I designed started doing exactly what it was supposed to. Quiet checks, silent confirmations, calls to credential validation services, back-channel signals to continuity partners. A system designed to hold a mirror to itself and say, "Are we whole?" It didn't find me, so it started whispering. Internal audit logs flagged key person dependency unvalidated. Cross-system pings slowed. Heartbeat signatures began to stutter. It wasn't a failure yet. It was a nervous system testing its own pulse and finding the wrist empty. That's the part they never understood. I didn't build a castle. I built a body, every part connected to another, pulsing with quiet intelligence designed to warn before collapse. The badge was its pulse check. They thought they pulled a plug. What they actually did was cut the oxygen. And now the machine was starting to breathe heavy. The badge looked harmless, just brushed metal and a smart chip embedded near the top left. But behind that little glint was a root of trust, chained to every regulatory protocol we ever built. I encoded the certificate myself, back when we ran on borrowed time and patched servers, praying the feds wouldn't notice the duct tape under our Tier 2 reporting. They never did, because I made sure they didn't have to. And that badge? It was the signed key to the whole damn thing. When Andrew flipped it over in that conference room, when his brow furrowed and the color drained from his face, the clock started. Not a metaphorical one, a literal one. Because once that ID was deactivated in the personnel directory, and let's be clear, HR definitely hit terminate the second I cleared the building, it triggered a buried function inside our continuity middleware. Contingency.auth timer.start 120 millianthem in 2 hours. That's all the time the system allows for key person validation reentry before it begins freezing core operations. No reauth from the badge. Then, all live dashboards time out. Every API connected to external compliance nodes seizes. Internal systems switch to escrow mode. Regulatory syncs fail silently and stack errors. It doesn't announce itself like a fire alarm. It just folds in. Surgical, cold, exact, and exactly what I designed it to do. This wasn't about revenge. I cannot emphasize that enough. It wasn't revenge. If I wanted revenge, I wouldn't have given them 120 minutes. I would have let the token expire on exit. Full stop, instant blackout. But I didn't. Because back when this company was held together by a dream, 3 interns and a very illegal VPN tunnel, I promised myself. The day something went wrong, the system would ask first. Give people time to fix what they didn't understand. I gave them that time. They just didn't know the clock was ticking. And I watched from my kitchen. sipped lukewarm coffee, opened the laptop I hadn't connected to the company network in months, and logged into the passive continuity mirror I'd set up during the last SOC audit, a read-only interface, no commands, just quiet observation. At 0822, the first internal flag registered. RegAuth token expired. Revalidation required. I smiled. Not because I wanted them to fail, but because the system was working. Then came the pings. Harmless at first. A delay in the DOE endpoint sync, then a discrepancy in Vault heartbeat confirmation. A skipped cross-signature from the analytics node. Every failure was microscopic, insignificant, until they added up. I imagined them in the war room, probably laughing, feeling victorious, high on whatever consultant Kool-Aid Jillian was mainlining these days. She probably had them up on their feet. New energy, new vision. That bullshit. Behind her, a screen blinking yellow. One line. Continuity check, pending validation, T-108 Mao, and nobody noticing. That's the thing about systems like this. They don't scream. They just leave the room. One by one, until you're standing there talking to yourself and wondering where the lights went. It wasn't just a badge. It was the heartbeat. And they just pulled the plug without checking if the patient had a DNR. The thing about confidence is it glows real pretty right before it explodes. That morning, while my systems quietly pulsed toward a reckoning, Jillian was in the ops center giving a TED talk to a room full of buzzwords and fitted blazers. New leadership, new rhythm, she said, standing like she'd just been handed the reins of a Fortune 50 company instead of ejecting the one person keeping the gears from welding themselves shut. Behind her, the monitor wall shimmered with real-time dashboards, uptime stats, traffic heat maps, token sync rates, and a single blinking panel in the lower left corner. Yellow, soft, ignored. Continuity check, pending validation, T-47 min. But she didn't notice. None of them did. She was too busy basking in the warm glow of sycophants. Every nod in the room was timed to her cadence. One guy, I swear to God, clapped when she said, forward-facing compliance posture, like she'd just cured regulatory cancer. Then a voice cut through the brown-nosing. It belonged to one of the consultants from Easton Metrics, a junior analyst, probably 3 weeks out of training, and just smart enough to know when things smelled off. Sorry, he said, squinting at a tablet. Are we sure the regulatory syncs carried over during the credential transition? Some of these signatures look soft. I could almost hear the silence that followed, but Jillian smiled. The way someone smiles when they don't understand the question but know they can bluff through it. Of course, she said with the confidence of a high school valedictorian about to hit a tree on prom night. Our systems are fully redundant. No interruptions. She gestured back at the wall. The consultants nodded. The yellow light kept blinking. 47 minutes left. I watched all this from my living room, streaming the internal ops feed from the ghost mirror I'd coded into the staging environment years ago, back when I still believed in overcommunication, back when they'd send me screenshots and ask, "What's this error mean?" before deleting the alert. Those days were over. Now I was watching it all like a documentary about a planet that didn't know its sun was dying. The monitors looked alive. The team looked sharp. Everything seemed normal, except it wasn't. Behind the scenes, sync validation requests were getting slower. Signature cross-checks were stacking into retry queues. The vault log had stopped updating, and the predictive routing models had begun switching to manual fallback mode. The system was holding on, but it was losing its grip. And still, no one noticed the flashing yellow box. They didn't recognize the language, or the placement, or the fact that T- meant time left until compliance termination protocol initiates. Because that line of code, that counter, wasn't part of the front-end UI. I'd buried it 5 layers deep in the heartbeat thread, visible only if you had access to the right audit scope, or if you were me, which they no longer had. I didn't sip coffee this time. I just watched, because the machine was still whispering, and the parade was marching straight toward a cliff. 10 minutes to 0. That's when the system stopped asking politely and started scanning with surgical urgency. I watched it happen in real time, packet by packet, thread by thread, like a body realizing it's been bleeding internally, and now the organs are checking out one by one. First came the continuity token sweep. It hit every known key person credential registry across the internal trust mesh. Primary credential, not found. Backup credential, null. Recovery override, unassigned. All three lit up red, blinking silently like unattended warning lights on a runway. Then log replication froze. Our entire distributed vault infrastructure relied on continuous log reconciliation, cross-signed, time-stamped, hashed. Without validation, the system refused to write another entry. It didn't trust the logs, and if the logs couldn't be trusted, nothing downstream could either. Then the dashboards locked, one after another. First the ops panels, then the compliance sync, then analytics. They didn't go dark, they froze. Numbers stuck mid-refresh, graphs stuck mid-pulse. It looked like the data was still there, but underneath, everything had hollowed out. A perfect corpse. Then came the monitoring loop collapse. I built that loop to self-test every 3 minutes. It ran diagnostic pings across our entire distributed backbone, validating not just service uptime, but credential integrity, cross-signing status, and most importantly, authority chain. And with each pass, it came back emptier, until finally, the loop pinged once, twice, then flatlined. And then the voice came. It wasn't dramatic, no alarms, just a smooth synthetic whisper from the ops center main console. Authority credentials missing, contact designated key person. That line wasn't supposed to ever be spoken. It was fallback code, a last-ditch prompt, buried in the logic tree in case of full systemic credential void. It meant the system had cycled through everything it knew and come up with nothing. It meant no one in that room, not Jillian, not her golden boy, not the Easton Metrics clowns, none of them had the clearance to even ask what was happening, because that prompt wasn't just a call for help, it was a confession. We are no longer authorized to operate. And still, nobody understood it. They were rebooting panels, power cycling consoles. Calling internal IT like this was a Wi-Fi issue. Jillian stood there like a ship captain yelling at the tide, convinced that volume equals control. Then the console flashed a message no one in that room had ever seen. Failsafe 9.2b triggered. Escrow protocol initiated. It didn't even blink, just held steady, like it meant it, because it did. That was the line I embedded after the near failure in 17. The moment the system lost traceable credential authority, it would default to escrow mode, freezing all core operations until the designated key person credential was either revalidated or manually overridden by board consensus. Not executive, not IT, board. That clause was reviewed, approved, buried, forgotten, until now. I closed my laptop, sat still, not angry, not triumphant, just still, because this wasn't a win. It was a checksum, and it just came back 0. 10:14 a.m., not a spark, not a sound, just stillness, like the moment between a deep inhale and the scream that never comes. The ops center didn't crash. It didn't glitch or blink or blue screen. It just stopped. Every screen froze mid-refresh. One panel held a timestamp from 10:13:47. Another was halfway through a vault access animation. The graphs, locked in mid-climb like someone hit pause on time itself. Someone in the back tried rebooting their console. Another one yanked a cable and jammed it back in like that would restart a dead pulse. Nothing responded. Because there wasn't a system anymore. Not one they could touch. Control access revoked. Privileged accounts flagged as suspended. The entire internal network rerouted to read-only observer status. No changes, no commands, no restores, just silence and a single unsympathetic screen on the main wall. White text, black background. Operational continuity failed. System in escrow. Unlock requires key person credential or board-authorized override. It held like a funeral banner. Jillian, standing dead center, still hadn't moved. Then she snapped. Started barking orders like a captain trying to scream air back into the lungs of a drowning crew. Reboot the nodes. Call DevSec. Pull up the recovery protocol. But the machine didn't move. It didn't even blink, because she was giving orders to a cathedral and the high priest had left the building. They scrambled. Dug through the continuity binders I'd printed, tried passwords, token resets, even legacy admin accounts. But none of them had the one thing the system was programmed to obey, my signature, my credential. I'd hard-coded it. Escrow mode was non-negotiable. Signed off by the board, notarized with federal continuity consultants after the last audit. Any unlock attempt without key person validation triggered a permanent lockdown notice sent to our regulatory liaison and our insurers. This wasn't just a technical freeze, it was a legal one, and they were trapped inside it. Watching it unfold from my kitchen felt less like revenge and more like watching gravity finally do its job. You can only suspend reality so long before the weight catches up. I didn't pace, I didn't gloat, I just sat with it. Quietly. I'd built this machine to serve. And now it was refusing them. Not out of spite, but loyalty. Loyalty to truth, to safety, to protocol, to the trust it was engineered to protect. That's the part no one ever sees. They think systems are about code, but real systems, they have memory. They know who built them. And they remember who betrayed that trust. Now the screens were dark. The heartbeat had stopped. And the only way forward was to call the one name they swore they'd never say again. The elevator ride up was dead silent except for the low whine of the ancient motor, a sound I knew better than most people know their own ringtone. I'd spent more nights in that building than I had in my own home, built the company's nervous system from scratch inside those walls, one protocol at a time. Now I was back, summoned like an emergency locksmith to the house that used to be mine. Andrew was waiting in the lobby when I stepped off. He looked like hell. Shirt rumpled, eyes bloodshot, a man who'd spent the morning watching everything he believed about control systems evaporate in real time. She didn't know what she was terminating, he said, almost like a confession. I know, I said. No heat, no triumph, just fact. He stepped aside and I walked past him. Into the boardroom. Every director was already there. Phones down, laptops closed. All eyes on the empty chair at the head of the table. Mine, once. No one dared sit there. Jillian wasn't in the room. The general counsel stood first, voice low. She can't override it. I just raised an eyebrow. He continued. The system's locked. The failover escalated all the way up to the regulatory node. They pinged our liaison already. We've got 48 hours before this flags as a material risk exposure. Insurance will require a full audit if we don't reverse it. Silence again. Then I reached into my tote and pulled out a single laminated sheet, worn around the edges, but the yellow highlighter was still bright enough to burn retinas. I slid it across the table. They leaned in to read. Section 9.2b. Reactivation requires original key person credential or complete system rebuild, minimum 180 days. Per compliance architecture terms dated 2018. It was all there. Signed, stamped, filed, approved. By them. The rebuild clause was my line in the sand. It meant if they couldn't get me back in, they'd need 6 months, 3 consultants, and at least 2 regulatory waivers just to restore half the system's baseline functionality. That's not even accounting for the risk exposure reports, third-party contract pauses, and the very real possibility that our federal clients would walk the moment escrow mode hit day 2. Every clock in the company had stopped at 10:14 a.m., and they all knew it would stay that way until I signed back in. No one spoke for a long time. They didn't have to. The silence did it for them, acknowledging what none of them wanted to admit in writing, that the system didn't just need a credential, it needed mine. Not because I made myself irreplaceable, but because they'd ignored every single step required to replace me properly. They skipped the clause. Now the clause was the only thing that mattered. I folded my hands on the table and waited. Let them sit with it. Let them feel the weight. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here because the system asked for me, and not even they could tell it no. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't want one. Apologies are for misunderstandings. This wasn't that. This was a failure of memory, of process, of respect. And I was here to rebuild exactly none of it, just the system. I slid the second sheet across the table, printed in 14-point, double-spaced, no legalese, no room for interpretation, just 5 lines. Reinstatement under board-only command, no executive override without co-signature, CEO's system access suspended for 1 year, quarterly infrastructure audits under my lead, continuity clause stays untouched, permanent. The chair of the audit committee read it twice. Andrew looked up and met my eyes. You're not asking for her job. No, I said. I'm taking mine back. They all looked at each other like they were waiting for someone to push back, but no one did, because it wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. I hadn't just proven the system needed me. I'd proven they couldn't afford to run it without a structure that prevented this from ever happening again. Jillian had made a move. I built a wall to make sure no one ever tried it twice. One of the directors, the oldest one, a man who used to call me kiddo in budget meetings, finally cleared his throat. "These are fair." The others nodded. Then, without fanfare, the chair of the board tapped the table once, effective immediately. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was the clean click of gears realigning after months of grinding. They didn't understand what I'd done. Not fully, not technically, but they understood enough. The silence in the room had shifted. Less about me, more about what I represented now. Not ego, not vendetta, not revenge, just continuity. I stood and turned to go, then paused and pulled one last sheet from the folder. A postscript. I placed it gently on the table. "Please reauthorize vault access. Credential. 00817 escrow release protocol follows on reactivation." No one argued. No one blinked. Because they finally saw what I had protected all along. Not my job. Not my pride. The system itself. The only thing holding the whole place together. And they knew. I wasn't handing it back over. I was just keeping the key. She waited until everyone else had cleared the room. The directors, legal, even Andrew, who gave me a tight nod before slipping out like he wanted to vanish through the carpet. I was packing up my folder when she walked back in, holding something in her palm like it might bite her. The badge. The same one she'd demanded I leave behind as security stepped up behind me. She didn't look angry anymore. Not smug. Just stripped bare. Like the moment you realize the thing you threw out wasn't garbage, it was the foundation. And now the roof's missing. She walked to the table. Placed it down with 2 fingers. "This is the key?" she asked. Not defiant, not sarcastic, just small. I nodded once. Then I picked it up and turned toward the terminal they'd wheeled in, cables trailing behind it like surgical tubing. Inserted the badge into the reader. The light flashed green. No fanfare, no sound. But the room changed. On the wall, screens blinked back to life, one by one. The frozen dashboards resumed. Real-time data resumed its pulse. Logs began reconciling. External syncs reconnected. Alerts silenced themselves. No alarms, just quiet competence. Like the system was exhaling. It hadn't missed them, but it remembered me. I unplugged the badge, walked to the table, and set it down again, this time gently, like a scalpel returned to its tray after a clean incision. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. I stepped toward the door, then paused. Turned back just enough to meet her eyes. "You wanted it off the table," I said. Calm, even. "Now it's the only thing keeping your table upright." Her lips parted like she might say something, but nothing came out. So I walked. Down the hall I'd helped wire with fiber myself. Past offices where half the staff still used onboarding templates I'd written 6 years ago. Through the same glass doors they'd walked me out of, thinking they'd buried me under some cheap applause and a new corporate slogan. I wasn't buried, I was built in. Later, someone told me she kept the badge in her top drawer after that. Never used it, never moved it, just left it there, like a relic, a talisman, a warning. She kept her title, her office, her voice in meetings, but she never touched the system again. Because the difference between a badge and access is knowing who it answers to. And now, it didn't answer to her.